For more on how this FCC decision could further complicate a U.S.-China trade deal and where that deal actually stands, Yan Liang joins us from Portland, Oregon. She is an associate professor at Willamette University, specializing in international trade and finance, especially involving China. Professor, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I mean, really, this Huawei and ZTE situation, this has been a thorn in the side of President Xi for a while now. So does this complicate things going forward on trade negotiations?
I think so. I think, from the very beginning, this is a sort of a trade tension, but then very soon it gets into sort of this tech tension. But it's very difficult to see at this point, how this is going to play out. I think there are sort of opposing, competing forces where, on the one hand, that U.S. tech firms wanted to sell to Huawei, and the U.S. also needs Huawei to build its, telecommunication infrastructure. Yet at the same time, to outcompete China in the technological development front, the Trump administration wants to use certain measures to contain Huawei's development. But what is interesting is, since Huawei was blacklisted by the United States, Trump has so far had granted 3 times the temporary extension of the general licensing, which would allow U.S. companies to sell to Huawei. So I think it's complicated. It's a very complicated issue, and it's not clear, to what extent that these kinds of tech tension would be resolved very soon. And I think that would come probably later after the so-called Phase 1 deal, when the more sort of structural issues are being discussed.
Yeah, maybe in one of those Phase 2 or Phase 3 deals that the president has talked about. He was on this morning show, Fox and Friends, this morning, and he said that a deal with China was potentially very close. But this comes after reports that a deal may not even be reached this year. Do we actually have a sense of when and if a real piece of paper is going to be signed?
Well, this is a great question. I think this is the question that everyone is eyeing on. I think it's clear that from the interview this morning, President Trump with Fox and Friends, it seems that he's taking these trade negotiations very seriously, and he's willing to even maybe veto the bill, which has really strong bipartisan support with regard to Hong Kong, and it really clearly shows that he's taking the trade deal as his top priority. And this is not surprising, even though he said he's not eager to reach a trade deal. But we all know that he has an election to run next year, and he needs to have the support from the electoral basis from the West. And he also needs a very strong economy heading into 2020. And it seems that recently the stock markets have been blipping up and down based on the headlines of the trade tension. So I think it's clear that he is willing to come to the negotiation tables and hopefully roll back on some of the tariffs as China demands in order to reach at least this Phase 1 trade deal.
You talked about the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act that just flew through Congress this week. It's sort of making its way to the president's desk at the moment. He signaled that perhaps he's not going to sign this, not a straight out veto, but perhaps he's not going to sign this. Is that a red line for China? And if it is, and this becomes law even without the president stepping into the matter, what does that mean? How is China going to react?
I think so far both countries have tried, and they have managed not to politicize the trade negotiations. I think Trump has indicated early on, back in June, that China should be handling the Hong Kong issue, and he's not going to step in the way. And I think he seemed to continue to take that approach. And it's clear that, with this complicated political factors, it would be counterproductive for the trade deal. On the side of China, I think Beijing is also clear that this is a bill that has the bipartisan support, almost unanimous bipartisan support at the Congress. And Trump probably doesn't have a lot of room to play in this matter. Even if he veto or even he doesn't sign the bill, it will still be overridden by the Congress. So I think China will still continue to protest, and they will still continue to show displeasure with this sort of bill. But I think they will seek maybe other ways of retaliation or diplomatic channels to solve this, to sort of confront with the U.S., but not with the trade talks.
All right, so those continue to go on. Thank you so much, Yan Liang there from Willamette University.